Hello and welcome to Let's Talk the new International Rugby Calendar. I am Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul, and overnight, for me at least, World Rugby announced the new international calendar that will run from 2020 to 2032. This is something that's been sort of discussed and has caused a lot of discussion amongst the unions and World Rugby, and it's taken a long time to come to agreement on. Even though it's still 2 years away before it kicks in. This is relatively late for these things to be agreed. There was a lot of talk about trying to get an international season and have the domestic season globally at the same time, but it's just been figured out that just won't work. And so what we have is something that's pretty similar to what we have now with slight modifications. If you're watching live, please do comment. I'm happy to have questions during the show. Also, if you're watching the recording, then reply on Twitter or put your comments down below. It's all much appreciated, and I will get back to you. So the big change is that the June window will move to July, and that post-Rugby World Cup there'll be 2 games, not 3, in that window. The November windows does move by a week or so, but that's about it. Otherwise, it is it's pretty similar to what we have now, which should really be no surprise, and it's what I said a while back, and I think plenty of others have done too. The big change is the increase in T1 v T2 games, which is up to 110 games over the 12-year period. I've not got my calculator out yet to figure out what that means, but apparently that is a 39% increase on the current setup, which can only be good. The other big thing is that Tier 2 nations will get to host Tier 2 teams more regularly, which is fantastic. A couple of weeks back I talked about what do Tier 2 teams need to become Tier 1 teams, and one of those is not only just having Tier 1 games, but hosting them as well, as it allows them to build their infrastructure up and their commercial relationships up, which helps also with funding of the game. So that is good news. So how are they going to happen? France and England are off to tour the Pacific Islands at some point. We don't know when within that 12-year period, whilst USA, Canada and Japan will also host tours. That's all good news. What I would have liked to have seen in there was something about annually hosting tours, because they need the regular games to build up those relationships, not just one-offs. And that's where Georgia and Romania do get something good out of this. They will get to host 6 nation unions within the July window, and in some of the press releases you see that's down as being an annual thing. So every July they will get a game at home against a 6 Nations team, which is a great start. The Southern Hemisphere will also host Tier 2 games in the July window. That's something that's been sporadic historically. Hopefully that's an annual thing, because last year there were no Tier 2 games in that window against the Southern Hemisphere sides. So hopefully we'll see that be an annual thing and a commitment to that. Then there's a guaranteed 6 Tier 2 games against the 6 Nations side during the November window. This has effectively been happening anyway, so this isn't going to be an increase. If you think about it, there are 4 Tier 1 nations down south that come up to tour Europe, and there are 6 Tier 1 teams up there. That means 2 teams have a gap every weekend. Make that 3 weekends, 3 times 2, 6 games, it's easy. So it does mean, unfortunately, that Georgia and Romania, it doesn't look like they will get Tier 1 to host Tier 1 games during that November window against the likes of New Zealand, South Africa, Australia and Argentina. But at least we are seeing that guarantee of those Tier 2 games there. So overall, this is good news. We have the certainty. We're not having arguments going in. It's a long period, so as well, which means countries can plan around it. But there are some downsides to this. This is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It never was going to be. There is no clear pathway of a Tier 2 nation to become a Tier 1 nation. That's still missing, and that's one of the big things that I think that a lot of commentators want to see, is letting Japan and letting Georgia know how can we if you do this, you will become a Tier 1 team. That's not there. There is no pathway for that. And it looks like a 12-year box, so it looks like a kind of a 12-year glass ceiling until 2032, where there's no space for them to become Tier 1 teams. Other things that are missing from this, the Lions haven't been mentioned, but they're such a commercial success that you'd expect they will continue at least around the 3 countries that they currently talk, which is South Africa, Australia and New Zealand. It would be nice to have seen perhaps some news about whether they will tour Argentina or not, but I say there's no news around the Lions, but I can't see them not continuing. One of the other big sticking points in this was revenue sharing. Currently, the host nation keeps all the money and just gives a small amount for travel to the visiting team. Now, countries like England, with an 80,000+ seater stadium, can make a lot of money from hosting a game. Countries like New Zealand, where they have multiple stadiums and they're much smaller, they make a lot less money. And so New Zealand especially were looking at trying to get a 50-50 split, or at least an increased percentage of the revenue from those games, but that doesn't seem to be mentioned. It's also a big thing that Tier 2 nations have complained about in the past, is that they go and play a game in a Tier 1 country, but they never get the return visit. So there isn't that equal revenue. They don't have the opportunity to make the revenue that the Tier 1 team has. So there's no news around that in this. The other bargaining chip that was on the table was residency qualification. Currently it's at 3 years, and there's lots of talk about it moving to 5 years. That again hasn't been mentioned in this, but that's not really part of the calendar, so you wouldn't necessarily expect it to be. But I would expect some news on that over the coming days or weeks, because I think that's been part of these discussions, and they will have come to agreement around that as well on this. So overall, the good news is a decision has been made. That's great. It's for 12 years. That provides stability. That's good. There are increased Tier 2 games, and there are games, and the Tier 2 nations will get to host Tier 1 nations. That's all good news. So let's not get down on this. There's a lot of good news in this, but it does miss that pathway for the Tier 2 nations. If you've liked this and you're watching this on Twitter, please do share this with your friends. If it's on YouTube, give it the old thumbs up down below. Let me know your thoughts, do comment, and also sign up for my newsletter on Twitter. It's in the title there, the link. On YouTube, look in the notes below, the links there. I was going to talk about the Super Rugby structure. Obviously this news coming out has bumped that, so I'll be talking about that on Monday, giving you my thoughts around the Super Rugby structure and all the rumours that are flying around on that. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy whatever rugby you're watching this weekend. I'm looking forward to the Crusaders Blues tonight. As you can see, I've got my Blues jersey on, but there's plenty of other rugby to be watching, and I'll be keeping a close eye on that Six Nations, which has been a cracker this year.